guys, Richard Holden here, and welcome to the channel. Please make sure like, share, subscribe, ring the bell so you get notified about all of these videos. Today we're asking this question: why would OEMs use big V8s when they could just as easily make supercharged, smaller, for instance, V6 motors to make the same power? Let's find out. In this video, we're going to compare a large displacement, in this case a 5.9 liter Dodge Magnum V8, to a smaller displacement, in this case a 3800 Series 3 V6 equipped with a supercharger. What we want to find out is, can the smaller displacement V6 with the addition of a supercharger adding boost take the place of a larger V8? The interesting thing is both of these motors made almost identical peak power numbers within a couple of numbers, but the torque curves couldn't be more different. I'm going to show you what happens when we compare them stock, and then what happens when we compare them modified to show you why there's still need for a big V8. So the question is, why use a larger displacement V8 application when we can run a smaller displacement V6 with boost? And I wanted to illustrate this with two motors that I ran recently. One is the 5.9 liter Magnum, the Dodge, a 360. And then the second one is the 3800 Series 3 supercharged V6. It's not uncommon for them to run forced induction on a V6 application with a supercharger in this case, and or turbos, and they both work well. But we'll take a look at a comparison between the two, and you can see why it's hard to beat big V8s, actually, especially for low speed torque, where it would be really beneficial in like truck and towing applications. So this was our 5.9 liter. It was bone stock. This one was actually a 10 or 12-year-old Mopar Performance crate motor, but basically that meant that it was a stock Dodge Magnum motor pulled from the assembly line. They equipped it with a dual plane intake manifold, and then we equipped it with a 750 Brawler carburetor. In this case, it was run with stock exhaust manifolds, and we tuned it with a Holley HP management system. And so equipped, this combination produced 291 horsepower and 389 foot-pounds. Now we're going to compare that to another motor that I got. This one was from a wrecking yard, but I run a wrecking yard Magnum 360 in this condition, and it makes exactly the same power. So basically we're looking at apples to apples on this. The 3800 was a Series 3, meaning it was rated at 260 horsepower, actually slightly higher than the Magnum is in terms of horsepower. But it was a supercharged version with the Gen 5 supercharger on it. It was all stock the way that it came from the wrecking yard. Again, we ran it with a Holley HP management system. We did upgrade the injectors, but for this power level, that really wasn't necessary. The reason that we upgraded the injectors is because we were going to go up in power quite a bit. And you saw some of those other videos up on the channel. Here's what happened when we ran the supercharged version. And because this gets so complicated, because how close the horsepower and torque numbers are on the different kinds of motors, what I'm going to do is, you can see, we're going to get rid of this, and we'll just talk about horsepower for right now and then talk about torque. The interesting thing is both of these motors made within a couple of horsepower of each other. It should be noted we ran E85 on the supercharged version and made a little bit less power with just pump gas. On the supercharged 3800, it made 289 horsepower compared to 291 horsepower for the Dodge Magnum. And they're within a couple of horsepower of each other, and probably we would see 2 horsepower variance from making these runs, unless we were real specific about the temperature of the water and oil when we were making these runs. So these are making really, really close to the same peak power numbers, but you can see the curves really couldn't be more different. I mean, even though the peak number is the same, they're happening at a dramatically different engine speed. So we have between 45 and 4600, it made the same peak number at both of those RPMs on the 5.9 Magnum, whereas the 3800 all the way out here at 5900 RPM is where this peak occurred. And as you might imagine, given all of the low speed power of the Magnum, we're going to see a big change in torque. So that's what we should look at next. Let's take a look at the torque production of these motors rather than the horsepower, which the horsepower number was equal on these two, plus or minus 2 horsepower. But as we'll see, the torque number offered by the bigger motor was dramatically better than even the supercharged combination. Taking a look at the torque curves really shows the difference and really shows the benefit of the additional displacement offered by the bigger V8 compared to even the supercharged V6. So here's the torque curve offered by the 5.9 Magnum in stock trim, 390 foot-pounds, 389.8 foot-pounds of torque. You can see all of this happened fairly early, and then the torque curve kind of fell off. These were not obviously high RPM or real powerful motors, but they were designed to enhance torque production. Here's the difference between the Magnum and the supercharged version. As you can see, even though, as we showed in the horsepower curves, they made the same peak power, the change in torque is dramatic between the two. So we have, for instance, down here at 3,500 RPM, we have 290 foot-pounds for the 3,800 supercharged version versus 390 foot-pounds. So you have a difference of 100 foot-pounds in favor of the bigger V8 motor compared to the supercharged version. And that's why big V8s work so well in truck applications and why the OEMs have usually put those in. And when they're trying to make really good torque production for these motors, a big and naturally aspirated V8 works fairly well. Although I can say now they're kind of switching over to turbo applications where they can run lots and lots of boost down low and kind of artificially create the same kind of torque curve, the kind of torque curve that everybody wants in a truck, because what we want is a lot of grunt and lots of low speed power. And this is exactly what we see in this comparison. But now let's take a look and see what happened. What happens if we were just to turn the boost up then? I mean, we have a supercharged combination, so we could crank the boost up. So let's take a look at that and see what happens when we turn the boost up, and then maybe what happens when we modify the V8. So in our comparison between the 5.9 liter V8 and the 3.8 liter V6 with a supercharger, obviously we can turn the boost up on the smaller V6 and find out if it can compare even better to the larger V8. So this is our 5.9 liter. This was our stock version. This is our stock version of the supercharger, and here's what happened when we turned the boost up on the supercharger by installing a 3.2-inch blower pulley and speeding the blower up, making more boost. This was about 5 more pounds of boost, so it was quite a bit. And obviously, and we talked previously about maybe having a turbo on this. With a turbo on this, you can, with the computer, control the amount of boost. So you can have a lot more boost down low and then tailor it off at the top to kind of create the curve that you want, which is a good thing about having the having control with the ECU over the boost, which we couldn't have here. We can reduce the boost by opening the bypass valve on this supercharged combination, but we can't have it make more boost other than, we possibly could speed it way up and then bleed it at the top, and we might be able to do a little bit of that. But this is an interesting comparison. Obviously now it's making a lot more boost. It's making a lot more power. Peak power is up to 340 horsepower, compared to 291 on the V8. We still see that the V8 down below 4,200 RPM looks like it's going to offer more torque, and we'll take a look at that torque curve and see what happens. But here's an interesting thing that, okay, we've modified the V6 to have it make more power by turning the boost up. What happens if we modified the V8 just a little bit and we have kind of predictable results here? We put a small camshaft in the V8 and all of a sudden it's making even more than the supercharged V6 was when we turned the boost up. Now obviously that's not the limit of this, but the V8 now is making, with long tube headers and a mild 212 cam, now making 350 horsepower and basically making more power everywhere than the 3800. So it's pretty easy to modify these and get changes in power. Now, obviously, the OEM is not going to put a They're not going to put a camshaft like that in a factory application, but it just goes to show you how mild they have those motors and how much extra power is available with fairly easy modifications. So let's take a look at the torque curves now, and we can see that you know, this how this plays out on the early RPM end of the scale. So now we take a look and see what happens to the torque curve when we modify our motor. So this is the 5.9 liter with stock torque production. Here's our supercharged 3800 that we showed you previously. Obviously, the 5.9 liter, lots more torque, 100 more foot-pounds. But here's what happened when we installed, you know, the blower pulley, and we picked up power quite a bit, but most of the gains came past 4,200 RPM. Below that point, the larger displacement V8 was still up by 40 foot-pounds or so. And this became, you know, even more dramatic once we modified the 5.9 liter with the camshaft and long tube headers, because then we gained another, you know, then the difference was 355 to 417. So again, any kind of modification at all on the 5.9 liter, because it was so mild from the factory, that almost anything that we did to it is going to dramatically improve, not only in this case power basically everywhere, so it made more horsepower, but it made a lot more torque everywhere as well. So there's no denying when it comes to torque production, a bigger motor works very well. Now obviously we are comparing a big motor to a small motor with boost. That should lead us to the conclusion that the ideal combination is to have the big motor with boost. Let's get to our conclusion. Okay, guys, what do we learn from this little adventure? And I think that the most important thing is that, yes, we still have need for large displacement V8s. If you take a look at a lot of the OEM stuff, there are still big, you know, if you're looking for towing applications, there are still big turbo diesel applications and also big naturally aspirated gas applications. The 7.3 liter Ford engine comes to mind, the 6.6 liter version offered by Chevrolet. And so we see there's still need for these big motors, and for the reason that I showed here. The big motors offer lots and lots of low speed torque. And I know the V6s are making headway with twin turbos on them. They have lots of boost down low. They can do all the programming stuff, and that seems to work out fairly well. But as you see, we still have lots and lots of big V8s. I'm Richard Holt. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. I'll keep testing.